All right. And so we have all this innovation um, in basically in production. The question is, was this passed on to the consumer? And the answer is yes. So if you look at prices, you see price falling basically across the board, and for all sorts of different consumer products. And so it seems like this innovation in production that allowed companies to produce much more at lower costs did indeed make its way to the consumer. And the U.S. This is really the beginning of the U.S.'s rise as a worldwide economic powerhouse. When we started this class, the U.S. is a backwater. The U.S. is, on the periphery of global political and economic power. As we near the end of this class time period, that's no longer the case. The U.S. has really become very economically prominent. And will become much more politically prominent in the 20th century. And one of the ways to look at this is the large corporations are basically all centered, not all, sorry, like over half are in the U.S. You take the 100 largest firms, 54 are in the U.S. If we go to the post-Cold War period, the world or economic power has become much more global. In that the U.S. has fallen to only having 40 of the top 100. And many of these are located in, all over the world. Okay. All right. And so, what are the U.S.'s inherent advantages? And we've kind of covered all the different institutional advantages that the U.S. does have. This, more open, or to say, hey, it provides the structure for entrepreneurship. It has the right institutions for entrepreneurship, and it also has some other key advantages that say, countries with similar institutions like a Canada or like a New Zealand or something like that did not have. So one, they have lots of natural resources. And so the raw materials of that production are readily available. Next, they have this large internal market that we've covered previously, large connected internal market that's important to cover the high fixed costs of starting a factory. You starting a factory, you need to know you're going to be able to sell to a wide swath of the population. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to cover those fixed costs. So this large connected domestic market coupled with easy access to raw materials really gives the U.S. a leg up to form these dominant companies. They also have the corporation, this institutional form of the corporation, which is a new thing. So your natural way to have a company is owner operated. So owner operated, owner managed. So somebody starts a company, they own the company, and they manage the company. A corporation is a little different. Okay, and so the U.S. this starts to become widespread post Civil War, and so this is you can sell off parts of the company to investors, via stock, and the firm is a legal person, which limits the liability. So this basically caps the downside risk. And makes it so you can take more risk. So you can add it to more. So you can raise capital by selling off shares, and then you can enter new ventures. And if they go bad, you lose the company, but you don't lose everything you own. If you own the company, so this is nice because it allows for easy start. It allows for risk taking and allows for investments. Okay, so you have the diversification. Shares can be traded. Yes, we all know about how stocks work. Okay, and by the end of our period in this class, all your large firms are publicly held, which means they are publicly traded on the exchange. Now, incorporation has some issue in that the ownership's diffuse. So there may be a few people that own a large portion of the shares, but there's lots of people who own it, and there's a separation between the people who own it and the people who control the corporation. Often, not always. You have cases say like in Amazon's case, where, Bezos, owns most of the company, he also runs it, and so, kind of a lot of the tech firms are still like this. These are all fairly young companies, in the historical sense, so like Facebook or something is, primarily owned by Zuck and then run by Zuck. But your more traditional firm basically has the separation between ownership and who runs the company. The CEO doesn't have a controlling stake usually, in the company. And so this kind of leads to some, there's some misalignment sometimes of goals where, the CEO often is incentivized to think short term. Owners are thinking more long term. And so need some mechanisms to make sure whoever is controlling the company has kind of the interest of the owners in mind. And so the way this works is markets basically for the right managers. You have contracts. You may pay them in shares to incentivize them to think more like an owner. And then the stocks kind of give the price of the stock, give the owners a good idea of how well the CEO is doing. Now this works perfectly. And so this is kind of the cost of having this form. Okay, so what's going on with the workforce? May cover this in depth later in the course if we have time. But primarily what is happening with the first industrial revolution is you have a switch to unskilled labor. So you're doing more specialization versus what came before, where there were skilled craftsmen who were making the entire good themselves. So all of a sudden you have an increase in the demand for unskilled labor. The second industrial revolution technology increases the demand for skilled workers, because this is a much more technical type of technology. So you're essentially running the machines and fixing them and working on them. That requires much more technical skill. Also in management too. And so you have kind of your machines replacing many of your low skilled workers. There's still a place for low skilled workers, especially when we get later on with the assembly line. But there's much more jobs for high skilled workers now. You got all sorts of, kind of like go back through history. They're like famous high skilled workers, kind of that are running these, not famous, but econ history famous, who are running these factories. And so your second industrial revolution industries really have, and by the way, what we mean by skilled and unskilled. So when we talk about skilled and unskilled, this is a kind of a proxy for education. So we typically in economics classify people with lots of education as high skilled, people with less education as low skilled. So we say the high skilled job requires lots of education, low skilled job requires less education. This is not a value judgment on the jobs. Of course, each human being is valuable, and what one person would consider high skilled, another person would consider low skilled. So this is just kind of the way it's discussed in the literature. It's not like a value judgment on the jobs or the people doing them. Okay, so the way we proxy for this is by education, and so what we see is those. Using the 1940 census, we see that this is the first time we have education data in the census. That's why we use the 1940 census. And so what you see is those industries that we associate with the second industrial revolution really have the highest concentration of the high school graduates, whereas those first industrial revolution industries, which are like cotton textiles, lumber, those have less high school graduates. And again, skill in this area, most people don't go to college in this area. So high school, like a high school degree is, a high skilled, would be considered high skill in this era. Okay, this is in the back half of the 1800s is when we first see these really, really large firms for the first time. This is when we see horizontal growth, buying up of your competitors, merging them together to form one like large monolithic company, and vertical integration, which is buying up my suppliers. So now I own the people supplying me, or buying up my distribution network. So now I kind of own the whole chain of production, from the raw materials down to the consumers. And so you have both these things going on in the time period. Okay. So you have horizontal mergers basically here, buying up our competitors, and more vertical mergers in this period. Similar to today, where we have like the rise of these powerful firms, like powerful tech firms like Apple and Google, Amazon and Facebook, I guess those are the big ones. That's the big four. I guess Microsoft's probably in there. Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. There's some acronym that characterizes those big tech firms. So there's lots of concern. You see these big companies, the people, at the top of these big companies are getting fabulously wealthy, more wealthy than, what was previously thought possible. Similar to today, the people on top of those tech firms that I mentioned have more money than, is basically conceivable. And by the way, that money comes from the fact they own, it's not like there's always this misconception, I think, in the public that it's like Bezos has like, like a Scrooge McDuck style swimming pool or something. The wealth of these individuals comes from the fact they own the companies. They own the majority shares in these highly profitable companies. That's where the money is. The money is in owning the company. I'm sure they have I'm sure their bank accounts are healthy as well, their assets, but the money, the billions, is the fact that, that the company's own. You can't just get it's like the way you would take the billions away from the billionaires is you'd have to force them to sell and then take the billions, or somehow destroy, take over the company, nationalize the company, or something like that. You can't just take the billions are in the company. Anyways, that's always annoys me about the public discourse. Okay, so and these are large companies for their time, but compared to present companies, present companies dwarf them. Okay, so these large firms of the day at the end of the second industrial revolution, when the first time we, really have data, these are their profits, adjusted profits. Our present day firms dwarf those. Okay, let's take a break before we talk about CEO pay briefly.